Pope Francis keeps dazzling. My God. So, you know, he's talked about the gap between rich and poor in the past since he ascended to the papacy. But the growing gap between the wealthy and the poor has become a theme for him. As long as the problems of the poor are not radically resolved by rejecting the absolute autonomy of markets and financial speculation and by attacking the structural causes of inequality, no solution will be found for the world's problems, or for that matter, to any problems. Today, everything comes under the laws of competition and the survival of the fittest, where the powerful feed upon the powerless. Masses of people find themselves excluded and marginalized, without work, without possibilities, without any means of escape. Human beings are themselves considered consumer goods to be used and then discarded. It is no longer simply about exploitation and oppression, but something new. The excluded are not the exploited, but the outcast, the leftovers. We have created new idols, says the Pope. The worship of the ancient golden calf has returned in a new and ruthless guise in the idolatry of money and the dictatorship of an impersonal economy lacking a truly human purpose. To all this, we can add widespread corruption and self-serving tax evasion, which have taken on worldwide dimensions. The Pope is literally calling for, around the world, higher taxes on the rich so that we can give more for the poor. That sounds like the Pope is calling for a redistribution of wealth. That can't be. Except, of course, it makes perfect sense, because who would call for a instant and quick and thoughtful, mind you, definitely thoughtful redistribution of wealth would be Jesus. And this would appear to be a Pope that is actually taking the teachings of Jesus seriously.
So we actually bring you independent media and a unique look at things, and now I stand in awe that the papacy is making logical sense.
Imagine the Pope actually keeping with the teachings of Jesus Christ.
And you know, they're saying, forget about this creationism stuff, and that's driving people in the States nuts, like crazy.
And also this against capitalism, that's really driving them nuts.
So we're here to celebrate. I'm Darin Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
Now check out another reason to celebrate.
Wal-Mart, the largest employer in the United States, can't seem to catch a break. There is a nagging trend towards treating workers humanely, including paying them a living wage, that has the Wal-Mart PR department working overtime to alter the public perception that the company is not a blood-sucking tick on the face of humanity. Okay, too much? Think of it this way. If corporations truly are people, then Wal-Mart is Ebenezer Scrooge. Hope. Perhaps the Waltonaires will receive a visitation from a trio of ghosts and emerge from their paranormal experience with a worldview where they are so repulsed by the fact that their obscene wealth is built and predicated on the suffering and poverty of the people they call associates, and the corporate welfare that they benefit from to the tune of $900,000 a year per Walmart superstore in the form of government assistance to the Walmart associates whose wages are so low that they qualify for these government programs. Added to this is the story emerging from Ohio that many websites are qualifying with the disclaimer, "not an onion story," where containers at a Walmart store are marked with signs asking for donations for employees. Jen Steer, writing at cleveland.com, notes, quote, "These bins in an employee-only area of the Atlantic Boulevard store are labeled, 'Please donate food items here,' so associates in need can enjoy Thanksgiving dinner." This has to be the final straw. Yes? I mean, when you add this straw to the pile, to the flack, to the well-documented illegal anti-union tactics, to violation of child labor laws, to forcing workers to work off the clock without pay, to forcing suppliers to deliver goods at a price point that incentivizes factory conditions with no emergency exits where brown people living in a far-off land get burnt alive while sewing clothes that we can then wrap so daintily in tissue paper and boxes and festive holiday wrapping papers and ribbons and bows all tucked under the Christmas tree with sugar plums and cheer in a never-ending cycle of consumption that has delivered wealth to the 6 Walton heirs that exceeds the wealth of the bottom 40% of Americans. All of this can no longer be called living better. Can it?
I mean, yeah, we're sitting here talking out off studio, and I said, this is just sick. Walmart with a food bank drive for its employees?
Especially when the Waltons own more money than 40% of the bottom half of Americans.
Yeah, 30% of the grocery sales in the States is going through Walmart tills, and they're claiming poverty that they can't afford to have their employees make enough to buy food.
Of course, it is causing a little labor unrest.
I'm looking forward to that little labor unrest expanding somewhat. Of course, then again, we've seen it around the world. When it hits $20 a loaf of bread, generally the local population starts to freak. Speaking...
Wall Street's having a hissy fit.
Yes, talking about freaking. When you see the monumental BS, that is fractional reserve lending, the way they make money up out of nowhere, charge interest on it, and then bankrupt the world doing it, this.
Well, they want to get those money hoarders, to start paying their way.
There you go. So check out the interest on savings accounts.
How could I end up paying if the Fed doesn't do what the banks want?
Well, let me explain it to you. The Fed in their October minutes revealed that they're discussing reducing this 0.25 basis points interest rate.
That's a quarter of a percentage point interest rate that they pay the banks.
They pay the banks when the banks give their cash overnight or on a long-term basis to the Fed to keep the money, to keep the cash there. So they've been paying the banks this just for the last several years. It's unprecedented. It hasn't happened in a very long time. And what the Fed is contemplating is cutting that interest rate.
And if that rate's cut, the banks don't get that money. So how do I end up paying them?
And that's it sounds like a small interest rate, but it's on $2.3 trillion. So it makes a difference for these. And what they're suggesting is they're going to pass it on to the consumer. To you and I.
To you and I. And the consumers are also the taxpayers, and the taxpayers were the people that bailed out Wall Street when Wall Street got into difficulty. Doesn't that seem like a thank you? Isn't that like sticking the fingers in your eyes of the people who saved you? I mean, the optics of this just look really, really, really bad. If I'm going to be charged to hold my money with a bank, I'm going to be down there saying no thanks, right? I mean, it's not right, and I'm sure you are too. Now, one of the things that the banks could do with all these excess reserves is they could lend it out. That was part of the quid pro quo when they took the money from the government, from the Treasury, i.e. from the taxpayers, was that we'll keep you alive, but you've got to lend. They could lend it. Radical idea.
Yes, and that is the Fed's point. They're looking for a stimulus. They're trying to incentivize banks to actually go out, deploy these funds into the marketplace, and help the economy. And that's what they're hoping they'll do.
Let's hope we don't get stiffed by the banks. Thank you very much, Patel.
So, of course, we know that the monetary system, the way that it's going right now, we're just seeing the last vestiges, the last grasp at the straw.
We're on the eve of destruction.
Yes, and they are refusing to talk about it in mainstream media. What's happening right now, the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States is dumping $85 billion a month.
That's $1 trillion a year.
Into the system, which, of course, is multiplied by a factor of 10 by all of the commercial banks that are getting that $85 billion a month out. So do your math. We are counterfeiting ourselves into destruction. I really hate to say logical things like that, but do your research. Just check it out, and if you have any questions, get a hold of us. But what do you got next? What are we doing?
Things aren't much better in the Emerald Isles of the UK either.
Yeah,
people there are facing some tough times.
Here on London's main shopping drag, Christmas has already begun, with all the exhausting spending that entails. But millions of households across Britain will be entering the festive season already saddled with unmanageable debt. A new report says personal debt has hit £1.4 trillion, as the rising cost of living forces people to borrow to make ends meet, debt they ultimately won't be able to repay. That £1.4 trillion is an average of £54,000 per household. That's almost double what it was 10 years ago, and almost as much as the country's entire economic output. That figure includes mortgages, secured debt. But the report warns that unsecured debt has also trebled in the last 20 years. Britons owe £55.6 billion on their credit cards alone, treble what it was 15 years ago. All that, says the report, has a harrowing effect on people and their relationships.
So Step Change the Debt charity sees about 500,000 people a year in problem debt. It ruins their relationships. It can really kind of put a lot of pressure on their family lives, and the stigma associated with debt just makes it really hard for people to deal with their problems.
And they're about to feel the pinch even more. Despite historically low interest rates, Britons have failed to pay off as much debt as their American counterparts. And when interest rates rise, as the Bank of England has promised they will as unemployment falls, mortgage payments will go up too, potentially putting thousands of families out onto the street.
So they're not that happy in merry old England today.
I think people are never going to get out of debt over there. They're just going to have to do that debt forgiveness thing.
Oh, yeah, sure. That's going to go over large.
They're doing it in Iceland.
And it's working really well. Of course, in Iceland, they, round their bankers up and their prime minister and throw their butts in jail, which is the opposite of what they do in the States.
Sometimes I could see Sharia law for theft, right?
Oh, my God. For bank theft, I think we should have Sharia law.
Yeah.
Okay. Wouldn't that work out for everyone? Okay. So what do you got? Last one?
Well, apparently there's been some accounting errors at the Pentagon.
Say it's not so.
The U.S. Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction found out that the Pentagon has hired 43 companies with suspected ties to terrorist networks. The data comes from the Pentagon's own classified investigative reports and Commerce Department list of terror-connected companies. Now, the list of these 43 companies included a road construction firm, presumably owned by a leader of the Haqqani network. The network was blamed for an attack on the U.S. embassy in Kabul that killed 16 people 2 years ago. The U.S. Army has carried out a classified investigation and said there was evidence of a direct role of both the company and its owners, quote, in the facilitation and operation of the Haqqani network, and that approximately from $1 to $2 million per month flows to Haqqani network to finance its activities. The Inspector General said, "I've seen the information, quote, and it made my hair stand on end," he said. Well, not just his.
The United States government subsidizing the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, the Haqqani network, those groups that are trying to shoot and kill our soldiers.
From the Inspector General, members of Congress have heard about billions of dollars simply wasted in Afghanistan. Now they have evidence suggesting that U.S. taxpayer money goes to finance terrorists or suspected terrorists, the same networks that the U.S. is fighting. Despite these findings, the Pentagon has resisted permanently blocking the companies from getting more U.S. contracts because its lawyers say they cannot use the evidence against these companies because the evidence is classified. The Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction pointed out what he called the absurdity of it. He said, "We can probably attack them via drone on Monday and we'll issue them a contract on Tuesday." In Washington, I'm Ganesh Chekyan, RT.
So that was kind of a stellar look at the capitalism world.
Yeah, well, capitalism does rock, and I think it's a system that is unsustainable.
And, of course, we have some statistics that prove that. However, we have a prime minister who's trying to make capitalism that much shinier by worrying about cell phone bundles and cable bundles. And
he's running off to Israel next month to talk about the bird sanctuary that was named after him.
I'm Darin Howard.
And I'm Robert Nisbet.
You're tuned into Radio Free Canada, 100% independent media, free of all the propaganda and nonsense that the consumer world has to offer. We've got some major specials coming up with the Municipal Sustainability Project.
Warriors and Thieves, a look at the War on Terror.
And, of course, we're going to be talking about more sustainable options and innovations that are all coming up in future shows right here at Radio Free. Thanks for tuning in.